From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
At the legislature today, the first full week of the legislative session begins on a sad note as lawmakers learn of the passing of former Governor Hewlett Smith. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is celebrated at the state capitol today, and the House of Delegates is out of the gate with legislation already on first reading on the floor at the legislature today. Good evening, I'm Beth Voorhees. Welcome to the season premiere of nightly legislative news and information on the legislature today. Our reporters and videographers are ready to bring you all the action from the second regular session of the 80th West Virginia legislature. West Virginians are mourning the death of former Governor Hewlett Smith of Beckley, who died yesterday at age 93 at his home in Arizona. Smith was elected in 1964 for a single term and never ran for office again. As Bob Brunner reports, there are those at the Capitol today who remember him well.
Two of West Virginia's worst tragedies occurred during Hewlett Smith's 4 years in office. The Farmington mine disaster took 78 lives in November 1968. 11 months earlier, the Silver Bridge at Point Pleasant collapsed, taking 46 lives. In a recent interview with West Virginia Public Broadcasting, Smith remembered leaving a budget meeting in Charleston to drive to the scene of the tragedy.
And it was getting dark about that time, and the bridge had already been down. And met there with two or three of the people from Point Pleasant that I knew and talked about what we could do to help anybody or this, that, and the other. And there wasn't any help.
Smith was an active governor who liked taking top officials to towns and cities around the state to hear local concerns. Current Attorney General Darrell McGraw was a young aide in those days.
A man who sought to bring an administration of excellence. Actually, that was his mantra, an administration of excellence to West Virginia. And he did that. And one of the people things that Hewlett Smith did was to take what he called government to the people. It is my belief that he initiated this program for the first time in West Virginia. He took the government, officials from the government, high officials from departments of the government to many different places in the state where they would have an opportunity to talk to and importantly, listen to citizens and citizens' concerns about West Virginia and citizens' ideas about West Virginia.
Word was beginning to spread through the Capitol concerning Smith's passing this afternoon. Two state senators remember him well. Harrison County's Joe Menard was a personal business friend at the time.
I think of Beckley. I mean, this guy lived and he ate and drank and slept Beckley, West Virginia. He was really a true Beckley man all the way. And the other thing is how loyal of a mountaineer he was. I mean, country roads, man, that was Hewlett.
Senator John Pat Fanning remembers the day Hewlett Smith actually appointed him to the legislature.
When I first ran for the Senate, I beat my opponent in the primary, and he decided to get out, and Hewlett appointed me. So I was a new senator within about a month after I'd won the primary. He was a great gentleman, a true West Virginian, and always concerned with the people, and had a lovely first lady.
Governor Hewlett Smith certainly didn't create the national controversy or furor as predecessor Wally Barron, or even Arch Moore, the governor who succeeded him. But the Beckley native was the governor in 1965 through 1969, and in 1968, his news conference was the first governor's news conference this young reporter ever covered.
Smith has been in ill health in recent years for West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Bob Brunner in Charleston.
In statements today, U.S. Senator Joe Manchin said Smith left a powerful legacy of leading our state into the future. Senator Jay Rockefeller called him a staunch advocate for the less fortunate. Funeral arrangements are incomplete and are being handled by a mortuary in Beckley. West Virginians joined the rest of the nation in celebrating the birthday of slain civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at the state capitol today. About 100 marchers proceeded from a downtown church to the Capitol Plaza for the traditional ringing of the Liberty Bell, led every year by the youngest children in the march. There were a half-dozen speakers, including Justice Thomas McHugh, who quoted Dr. King's famous letter written when he was jailed for protesting in Birmingham, Alabama.
The theme of this year's celebration is Children of the Dream, and I know that Senator Manchin's already...
But it's very insightful. And in that letter he said, "We must use time creatively in the knowledge that the time is always right to do right. So let us pledge together to use our time creatively to do right, today and always."
Kanawha County Delegate Misha Poore represented the House of Delegates at the ceremony and urged onlookers to make the observance a year-round commitment.
It is your responsibility to stand up for those who cannot speak for themselves. It's your responsibility to not let injustice come to you, but to find injustice, to make certain that if it's something that is happening, that we correct it, that we bring attention to it, and that we take action.
The ceremonies are organized by the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday Commission with the goals of commemorating the past and keeping King's legacy alive for future generations. 4 bills came up for their first reading in the House of Delegates floor session this afternoon. As Adam Cavalier reports, those bills deal with the courts and the Freedom of Information Act.
People found not guilty or who have charges dropped against them will file a petition as opposed to a motion when trying to get that record expunged. At least that will be the case if Mercer County Democrat and former Judge John Frazier's House Bill 3128 is passed into law. As it stands, people have to file a motion and pay a $150 court fee to do so. A civil petition does not require that fee. Frazier says it ultimately makes things easier on the courts.
Dealing with expungement is more of an administrative matter. It doesn't substantively change any right to expunge or no right to expunge it. It simply changes it from a motion to a petition, which doesn't seem like much, but to the clerks, it helps them track the matters more easily because there's more and more motions for expungement being filed, and that's tied to the case itself, so it makes it hard to track. A petition would be a separate action, and they could report more information on that.
While Frazier's bill on the expungement of records is supposed to make things easier on the courts, his House Bill 3132 is meant to protect jurors.
The motive for that was from the clerks initially was that they were receiving a lot of notices and Freedom of Information requests from prisoners after they had been convicted, that they wanted this information from the jurors, and the clerks were concerned that that information might be abused. And then we looked at it a little more broadly. When I was judge, I was familiar with those questionnaires, and there's a lot of personal information on those questionnaires. I believe that the feds are somewhat restrictive on that, and this would put it in the judge's hands after the case has been concluded whether to release that information.
While Frazier's bill is tied to Freedom of Information Act requests, Monongalia County Democrat Barbara Fleischauer's bill redefines the term public record in the actual Freedom of Information Act. Fleischauer says it stems from a Supreme Court ruling involving former Massey Energy chief Don Blankenship.
One of our justices was asked for his email, the email that he had received from Don Blankenship, who was president of Massey Coal. The court made a decision and said that because of the context or the content, these 5 emails were not relevant, and the idea that there was communication between someone who had a lawsuit and somebody was going to make a decision was very problematic.
Fleischauer says the small change in language will have a larger effect across governmental organizations.
If you are making a decision that can affect someone and there is a lawsuit over it, or there is a request for information about correspondence relating to that entity, then you would have to hand it over. That's the whole point of this, is that we should be transparent, we should be accountable.
All 3 bills made it through the House last session before stalling in the Senate. House Judiciary Chair Tim Miley says the bills were revisited so that wouldn't happen again.
early in the session, we try and put on the agenda bills that passed out of not just the Judiciary Committee last year, but also the House of Delegates, because we know those will have little opposition, and we can get those back in front of the Senate, hopefully earlier, so that the Senate will have time to consider those bills if they are so inclined to do so. So that's really the reason why we did it.
Those 3 bills, as well as another by Delegate Frazier that would eliminate the requirement of serving domestic violence orders by certified mail, move on to second reading in tomorrow's 11 a.m. House floor session. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Adam Cavalier in Charleston.
And in a moment, a discussion about the issues with Governor Earl Ray Tomblin. First, here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the Senate today. Among the bills introduced in the Senate today, Senate Bill 186 to provide salary equity supplement payments to teachers and service personnel in order to achieve salary equity among the state's counties. This bill was recommended for introduction and passage by the Legislative Oversight Commission on Education Accountability. Senate Bill 190 to limit the amount a property reappraisal can increase over the previous amount, and to clarify that the limitation does not apply to natural resources property. Senate Bill 193 to create a commission that will develop a pilot program to help at-risk youth in a selected county in West Virginia by introducing prevention strategies for children through early intervention and diversion. Senate Bill 195 to improve the integrity of the state's Medicaid and Children's Health Insurance Program by implementing waste, fraud, and abuse prevention, detection, and recovery programs. Senate Bill 199 to provide for the redistricting of the state's congressional districts. Senate Bill 200 to eliminate the timber severance tax for an additional 3 years. This bill is recommended for passage by the Forest Management Review Commission. And Senate Bill 201 to create the Unintentional Pharmaceutical Drug Overdose Fatality Review Team under the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. The bill requires the team to examine cases that involve unintentional pharmaceutical drug overdose deaths to promote public awareness as to the causes of these deaths. This bill was recommended for introduction and passage by the Legislative Oversight Commission on Health and Human Resources Accountability. It is the tradition here at the legislature today to begin our season with a visit by the state's chief executive. That tradition continues tonight. I'm pleased to welcome the governor of West Virginia, the Honorable Earl Ray Tomblin. Welcome. Glad you're here.
Glad to be back, Beth.
First of all, your memories of Governor Hewlett Smith. Did you have a chance to meet and talk with him on any occasions?
Well, I think my memories go back of Governor Smith more after he was out of office. I was in junior high and high school when he was serving his term as governor, and later got to know him, had a lot of discussions with him over the years, and just a very pleasant, very kind gentleman, and did a great job for us when he was governor.
All right, very good. Let's move on to your State of the State address. Regarding this education audit, now I must confess I have not read the audit. I've only heard some of what the audit says. More than half of our state budget goes to education. As you were reading this audit, was there anything that was particularly startling to you? Anything stand out in particular?
I think probably maybe the duplication of services was one of those things out there. It talked a lot about the evaluation of teachers out there, talked about teacher pay raises, or salaries. It talked about a lot of items. It covered a lot of area out there, and it's the first audit we've had done of this kind. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things in there. What I have encouraged people to do is take the audit, read it. Let's see what we do want to tackle that's been recommended by experts, and it's basically compared to what other states do. There's several things in there, and I'm touched on a few of them. Mm-hmm. I would anticipate the implementation would take a year or 2 years, but it's going to take buy-on from the various parties out there. So once again, I would just encourage every West Virginian who's interested to get a copy of it. I'm sure it's online, to look at it and see what you think of it and see what you think would work.
And it sounds like it's something that all levels of government are going to have to do. Can you deal with some of them as governor? Do you have to wait for the legislature to pass bills? Does the State Board of Education implement their own? How will this all be coordinated so that will we have a Department of Education that looks different than what the one we have now? And
well,
if so, when?
Sure, and that's what we're looking at too, and that's the reason I encourage people to look at it. You know, so we can come together, because we're all interested in education, but it seems like a lot of times we're all going in different directions. And I just think it's very important that those things that we can achieve out there, we sit down, let's put our mind to it and get it done for the good of the students in West Virginia.
All right. OPEB, other post-employment benefits, something we've been talking about for several years now. Now, the PEIA Finance Board took action to curb this giant liability on the state regarding subsidies and payments of subsidies to health care, to state retiree health care payments. Sorry, I was a little confused about that. So the PEIA Finance Board did what exactly?
Actually, they limited the amount of sick leave that could be used out there, some of the benefits that have been given over the years for future hires out there, and basically took a $10 billion liability and cut that in half to $5 billion.
Just by a stroke of doing that.
That's exactly
Now,
right.
this has to do with future retirees of future public employees.
That's correct.
Do you know if there's a cutoff point at like people hired tomorrow or next year, or?
Well, the legislature and the administration have addressed part of that. I think it was a year ago in July the 1st. Anyone hired after that time could not use their sick leave. And so, but yeah, we still got the other $5 billion, and I will introduce a bill this session to finally put ourselves on a payout plan. We can do it in 20 years and have this one out of the way. We've done it with our teachers' retirement system. We've done it with workers' compensation. This was the last huge liability that we had out there, and once we get ourselves on a payout plan for it, then I think that we can take our resources and start moving this state forward. Up until this point, we've had to take every new dollar just about that we got to plow it back in to those old sins of the past or the old liabilities out there. And once we get this done this session, and I feel confident we'll get it done, that will set West Virginia on the road to prosperity.
Can you give us a little hint on what this bill would do and how the money would be raised in order to pay it down?
Well, absolutely. We'll use a portion of the money that we use to pay down our unfunded, I think it's $3 to $4 billion in unfunded liabilities in our old workers' comp fund. In 2015, that fund will be paid off. Right now, we're putting around $90 million a year into that fund. What our plan will do, we'll take $30 million starting in 15, paying toward this, and the actuaries tell us that we can have this money. This is no new taxes. It's existing money that's in the system now, and also it will free up about $60 million from what we're currently putting in to the old workers' comp fund. But in 20 years, we'll have that liability behind us.
As you pointed out, you have dealt with so many liabilities: workers' comp liability, the teachers' retirement liability. Is this the last one, or are there others looming out there that we're going to have to talk about in the next few years?
Well, this is the last liability that we have out there. However, we've got to be very cognizant. When we look out in our 6-year plan out there, we see in the 2014 budget under the National Health Care Plan, there's going to be over 100,000 new West Virginians that's going to be eligible for Medicaid. Medicare.
Yeah, okay, one of them, yes.
And so obviously that's another big expenditure we're going to have in West Virginia. But once again, we're tightening our belts. We're doing what we can to make sure that we will have the money to be able to pay for these additional services. Now, one of the Medicaid, has a two-edged sword. We're doing well in this state, and one of the reasons this year that we had to put more money into it is because the better the state's doing, the less the federal match. So we're caught up in that trap also. But I think that we will be able to plan our budget where we'll be able to fund the demands out there and be able to give the people the services they deserve.
Medicaid is a very big ticket item for the state. Moving away from budgeting and money, let's talk about drug testing and workforce development. I'm a little confused. What exactly is workforce development?
Workforce development is in Workforce West Virginia is one that uses a great deal of federal funds and as well as state funds, but to train our employees, those who have been displaced, those who are looking for new kinds of job training out there. And the problem that we are having is that we're putting these people in, putting them through a training course out there. Once they complete that course and we've spent the money on them, they can't pass a drug screening test. And so one of my proposals this year is to have a drug screening before we spend the money. If someone cannot pass it, give them a chance to get themselves clean and then come back. Take it again. We'll pay to get the training done, but we want to make sure that once the taxpayers' dollars are spent to get the training done, that they then can pass the drug test.
Is this the same as unemployment? I'm laid off from my job, I'm looking for work, but I get an unemployment check. Is it the same thing?
Well, they're different. This is the training part that I'm talking about. Okay. The unemployment compensation, that's federal and state law that controls that anytime you lose your job.
Should there be a lieutenant governor full-time?
I think so, in light of what's happened over the past 12 to 15 months here. Yeah. There was a lot of confusion. We'd never faced a situation where there was a vacancy in the governor's office since the late 1800s. And the proposal that I had ready last year, and it was not presented until the very last day or so of the legislature because we couldn't get agreement on it, but basically would have a governor and a lieutenant governor running together on the ballot. Whichever ticket won out there, the lieutenant governor would be a department head, which would cost the taxpayers no additional dollars. And basically, in case that vacancy then would come, that lieutenant governor would give up that department head's job, become governor, and fill out the rest of the term.
So the Senate president would no longer be the lieutenant governor?
That's correct.
Huh. Well, this is my first chance at talking to you since becoming governor, so I just have a few questions about your management style, your style of leadership. When you need advice, who do you go to?
Oh, I've got an excellent staff around me. They're a group of young individuals. They really work me pretty hard down there, but I go to different groups. But my internal staff is one that I rely on a whole lot. Depends on what the issue. You go out to professional organizations, to union organizations. Get the input from people. It's what I like to do, and that has been what has guided me through my years in the legislature, and I still use that same approach today.
What worries you?
Oh, I think probably things that we have no control over, like not only the national economy but the international economy. We're so fortunate in West Virginia to be able to have the surpluses we have, a good rainy day fund, our bond ratings are being upgraded. But at the same time, with our investments out there, things that are happening in Europe and beyond is something that we have no control over, but affects our stock market every day. So those are things that could take us down in a minute, and we cannot do anything about it.
Governor Earl Ray Tomblin, thank you very much. An interesting conversation. I thank you.
Well, thank you, Beth.
And here's a look at some of the bills introduced in the House today. Among the bills introduced in the House today, House Bill 4076 to require health insurers to cover maternity and contraceptive services for all individuals who are participating in or receiving coverage under a policyholder's health insurance plan. Under current law, health insurers are not required to cover maternity or contraceptive services for dependents. House Bill 4079 to eliminate eligibility for parole for the offenses of first-degree murder, first-degree sexual assault, or murder of a child by child abuse or sexual abuse. House Bill 4082 to permit licenses and identification cards issued by the Division of Motor Vehicles to identify the individual as a veteran and permits a veteran to be issued a replacement license or card without charge. House Bill 4083 to provide a consumer sales and service tax exemption to nonprofit tax-exempt corporations or organizations affiliated with a church or association of churches. And House Bill 4085, the House Speaker's bill to implement mine safety reforms to address the tragic deaths at the Upper Big Branch mine in Raleigh County by implementing comprehensive reforms recommended by the mine safety teams investigating causes of that disaster. Among its many provisions, the bill establishes a toll-free number for miners to make anonymous tips on mining violations, increases penalties for violating underground mining safety requirements, enhances penalties for intentional violation of mine safety laws, and encourages miners to withdraw from unsafe working conditions. And this has been the Legislature Today. Tomorrow, we'll talk with Senate President Jeff Kessler. On Wednesday, a visit with House Speaker Rick Thompson, and on Thursday, the Republican response to the State of the State address with the minority leaders, Senator Mike Hall and Delegate Tim Armstead. On Friday, we'll review the new laws regulating Marcellus shale gas drilling. with Secretary Randy Huffman of the Department of Environmental Protection. Also on Friday, a special report on the life and public service of Governor Hewlett Smith. I'm Beth Voorhees. We leave you tonight with a performance of Our Home Among the Hills by the Appalachian Children's Chorus in the Senate today. Thanks for joining us. Good night.